Hey everybody, Pete Turner, executive producer and host of the Break It Down show, coming at you with today's intro for Dr. Andrew Friedman. Now, Andy is a friend. We've been on the show together several times, once with Dave West as a co-host and once with Paul Demek as a co-host. And Andy is a cosmologist at UCSD, UC San Diego. He studies, he did one thing called the cosmic bell test. And there's actually a special on Nova about that. You can see what he and his peers did to try to determine the laws of quantum physics and try to disprove what Einstein said and prove what Niels Bohr said. Gosh, I hope I get those names right. I think I have. I'm going off of memory here. Either way, there was a big, huge, very smart people conversation about 120 years ago, and they were trying to figure out the scientific world. And Einstein said one thing and Bohr said another. And then that led to the cosmic bell test, which Bell's a different guy 50 years later. Definitely interesting stuff. What we're going to do today, though, instead of discussing just straight up quantum anything, is we're going to see if we can bridge the gap between quantum mechanics, quantum theory, and religion and God, and see what happens with that. This isn't meant to proselytize or anything like that. It's just a bunch of dudes exploring a topic that is fascinating when you start to get to the point where science and God, I guess you would call it, for lack of a better term, when those things intersect and you start to lose track of which is which and can't explain why one is there and the other one isn't. So I think it's a real neat conversation. Scott Huesing joins me as a co-host. It's always fun to run Scott through these impossible conversations because it's just a good time, and he's a good sport about it. And it turns out he loved the conversation. So he goes in a little intimidated by it and watch what happens the whole first half of the episode. He loves it. Hey, listen, supporting the show, it's an important thing for us. It helps me out to go out and take it to market. So when you like, when you share, when you comment, when you tell a friend, take a show, take one next week and just recommend it to a friend and say, hey, would you do me a favor? And that's what I'm asking for today. Just would you do me a favor and listen to this show? Tell me what you think of it. See if you like it. I think that's it. That'll be that. And then Save the Brave, savethebrave.org. Click on the donate tab, drop in a small amount of money for each month, and know that you're helping keep veterans alive. We just had the guys out the other night doing some fishing. I think they went for lobster. And it's these moments that we look forward to, that we're able to get together and bond and realize there's something actually worth living for. That's what that money goes towards, is saving lives. If that's part of your personal charter, by all means, let's do it. If you're not sure what to do, charity on top. Give a friend some charity, let them pick. Those are great ways to support things. I ask all of you to look at how you do things, what you're doing, and where you can dig a little deeper and do something for somebody else. All right, enough of that. It's Friday. Everybody have a great weekend. Here comes Andrew Friedman.
Lions Rock Productions.
This is Jay Moore.
This is Greg Proops.
This is Jordan Harbinger.
This is Dexter from The Offspring.
This is Nathan
This is
East.
Sebastian Younger.
This is Rick Marotta.
This is Stuart Copeland.
This is Mick Gillette.
This is Andy Summers.
Hey, this is Skunk Baxter.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Rob Bell.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
Hi, I'm Dr. Andrew Friedman, and you're listening to the Break It Down Show.
And now, the Break It Down Show with John Leon Guerrero and Pete A. Turner.
UCSD once again, about to have my mind exploded, and I thought it would be fun to explode Scott's brain too.
Always.
We were talking about our man Andy, who worked on the cosmic bell test. You guys can see that. Is that Nat Geo or is that Nova? What is it?
They made a documentary on the PBS show Nova, which aired early last year, called Einstein's Quantum Riddle. That was about the experiment that my colleagues and I did in the Canary Islands, testing something fundamental about quantum mechanics and quantum entanglement.
Yeah, and the last time I was here, I was kind of noodling around with you on this, and I said, wait, is there quantum gravity? And you said, yes. And then I'm like, all right. Hey, this is Pete A. Turner from the Break It Down Show, checking in real quick to ask you this. John, Scott, and I all support Save the Brave with our time, our location, our effort, and our money. Each month we give a small amount. Do the same with us. Go to savethebrave.org. Click on the donate tab, pick an amount that you want to come out each month, and they will handle all the rest. I stand behind these folks. Thank you so much. Let's get back to the show. Yeah, and the last time I was here, I was kind of noodling around with you on this, and I said, wait, is there quantum gravity? And you said, yes. And then I'm like, all right. I still don't know what to do with that. Like we don't know how gravity works. We know things are likely to be entangled. We know that we have to give up freedom of choice and location as part of this. And I forget what the third element was, but I'm just like, all these things.
There's a lot of esoteric stuff when you're getting into the foundations of, the basic physical theories that, we understand in physics.
Yeah.
So, when you're talking about, quantum mechanics, which governs the subatomic world, atoms, electrons, photons, the smallest elements of reality that we know about. And then on the other hand, you have general relativity, which is Einstein's theory of gravity, which governs large systems like planets, stars, galaxies, and even the entire history of the universe and how it expands and how all the forces interplay. But the subject of quantum gravity is kind of the frontier of physics, where we don't know how to get quantum mechanics and general relativity to play nice together in certain areas where they overlap. So that we know there has to be something more. We know that neither of them is the final theory of everything. And one way to kind of tackle that question, what we've done is we've tried to look into the foundations of quantum theory and look into the weird phenomenon of entanglement, which we talked about on previous shows.
Yeah,
I think we should set the stage though too for the listeners out there.
Yeah.
So we're at UCSD, University of California, San Diego, right by our house, and we're on campus, milling about, a bunch of young millennials. And Pete, I don't know how you meet all these people or how these introductions work. It's a strange network, a quantum Turner network or whatever that people are connected. It's crazy. And then you told me about this show, and again, I'm a little in over my head thinking, oh man, I'm just gonna be a fly on the wall. But again, when you meet people and you walk into their natural habitats, we go into the science building here at SURF, and you look at Andy's computer. It's this tiny little computer screen. No, it's like the size of a fucking whiteboard.
And it is a little bit ridiculous.
There's all kinds of
and it's got a little buddy.
There's all kinds of mathematical stuff going on in a narrative in text, which is mind-blowing in and of itself. But I think the interesting part is Pete knows Pete's way smarter than me, by the way. We're both storytellers, but I love the human element of it too. And when we walk in, like, you're automatically like, what are you all about? And asking questions about us, which is something that most people don't get, because they get a little gun shy at times, I think, to stick their toe in this pool of water. Yeah. And then to find out, and he starts talking about, I was in, MIT, and this is my background, and my wife's a criminal defense attorney. And, it's all, again, like most people, self-proclaimed and proud nerd, as you stated.
Absolutely.
Earlier. The question I had to Pete before all this happened is Andy going to be able to explain to the listeners what it is that you guys talked about? And Pete gave me a great analogy at lunch using 3 cups of marinara sauce, water, and some Parmesan cheese. So,
and I still forgot one of the things. I knew proximity and I knew freedom of choice, but I still couldn't remember. Like, it doesn't matter. It's something super obvious that you would not want to surrender. But I was able to explain, these things shouldn't be connected, yet we can't disprove it.
Yeah,
we can't say that.
How do you explain it to the guy who graduated high school with a 1.24 GPA and went to Illinois State? To that listener out there, me.
So we can cover some of that ground that we've covered in previous podcasts for sure. So I mean, I guess backing up. So quantum entanglement is this weird phenomenon where if you have a pair of particles and I send one off to you, one off to Pete, and he measures some property of his particle, he instantly knows something about a future measurement on your particle, no matter how far apart they are, no matter how long ago they became entangled. Basically, an entangled system is a system that cannot be described as independent things. So when things are entangled, they're correlated with each other. There's the joint state of the combined system of the 2 particles, but you can't really talk about each individual particle. We've done experiments over many years, and the phenomenon has been dramatically demonstrated in the laboratory. So it's a real thing. So that we're trying to figure out what is an explanation for it. How does why does it actually work? And on the one hand, we have quantum mechanics, which is a theory which does predict entanglement. But Albert Einstein, amongst others, back in the 1930s, thought that quantum mechanics had to be incomplete, especially because of things like entanglement. To him, it looked like when Pete's measuring his particle, somehow some instantaneous influence is propagating over to you. And Einstein is very famous for his theory of relativity, which says that no information can travel faster than the speed of light. Now, in modern understanding, we don't actually think that when Pete measures his particle, your particle's state actually changes. We think that it's knowledge and information that's updated instantly, but there's still some weird, it's not causation that's propagating instantly, but correlation that's changing in a weird way. Einstein called it spooky action at a distance entanglement because he thought it was absurd and that it was pointing towards quantum mechanics couldn't be a complete theory of the world. So when Einstein was trying to think about alternatives, he was thinking about alternatives that were more like the everyday physics, Newtonian physics, the kind of stuff that we learned in high school. So there are a few different properties of the world that Einstein wanted to be true. One of them is called locality. So it's the idea that things can only influence each other if they bump into each other, or if they send a message at the speed of light or slower. The speed of light is the maximum speed that any information can travel. And he also wanted the world to be realist, in the sense that he wanted particles and things to have definite states all the time, no matter whether we were looking at them, measuring them, or whatever. In quantum mechanics, that is kind of cast into doubt. And another thing which kind of came to light later, which was kind of implicit in Einstein's reasoning, is that experimenters should be free to choose what measurements they're making. So when Pete has an entangled particle and you have one, and let's say you're measuring the polarization of a photon, like you have polarized sunglasses and you're rotating them at some angle, that changes whether the photon goes through or not. And basically that's what an entanglement experiment looks like with photons, where you each are orienting your sunglasses at different angles, so to speak. They're not really sunglasses, but things that are like that. Mm-hmm. You count how often the answers line up in certain ways. And in quantum mechanics, they can line up with correlations that exceed, in a surprising way, the kind of correlations that would be possible if the world was more like what Einstein wanted to be true. So it's been experimentally verified, but we are still kind of looking into ways that poking at the cracks to see if there's any way that something like what Einstein wanted to be true is still possible. And if you look at those various assumptions about the world, locality, realism, and freedom, it turns out that if the world doesn't actually obey some of those, that can still allow for a worldview that's different than quantum mechanics to explain the weird things we see in entanglement. So we work on experiments to try to push those boundaries.
As someone that gets paid as a researcher, you're not teaching, right? You don't have a class load or anything like that. You're solely focused on.
Yeah, I'm funded by grants, but I don't have teaching responsibilities day to day.
And you've been doing this for so long, pretty much your whole life. You went from academia back into academia and now in researching. Let me ask you this, with all that I know about you right now, is do you find as a researcher more gratification in this job, this career path in life that you've chosen, about asking questions or getting the answers to questions?
Yeah, that's a great question in and of itself. It's interesting because there's no scientific formula for what questions should I ask about the world, or what should I be interested in? And those are subjective preferences. And I feel super lucky that I've been able to, in many cases, have the freedom to come up with some of those questions myself in collaboration with others. And I think that there are some questions that if you're being honest, it's really hard to get a definitive answer. I mean, in science, there's always uncertainty. And there are always other things that you might not have thought of yet. And the way that scientific knowledge accumulates is by usually progressively small steps. And so the work that we've done is we're trying to illuminate the question of how can we explain quantum entanglement in a way that makes sense. And I would not say that we have gotten the answer, but being able to approach the question in a fresh way has been really fun. And in particular, what we decided to do is, instead of letting things on Earth make the measurement choices on the entangled particles in our experiment, we outsourced that to the universe. So we pointed telescopes up at distant stars in our own galaxy, and then later on, distant galaxies called quasars. And we used the color of the light that was coming from those quasars that's been on its way for billions of years. Like a random number generator, if it was like red or blue, we would either keep our measurement setting the same or change it for the entangled particles. we basically outsource the choice of measurement to the universe. And it's just been really fun as a researcher to be able to be somebody who helped think of that idea with colleagues.
Who do you try and grab the answers to those questions for when you're doing all this? You're like, oh God, I can't wait to tell the public this, because one of the things I was talking to Pete at lunch about too before we came in was, most people think here, planetary. You're thinking galactic, intergalactic spatial relationships. But what matters most to human animals is how does it affect me?
Sure.
How do you explain that to me and what you do here, all the information you gather and the answers you're going to provide me? What does it mean to me?
So I think that science is for everyone. Science is for every human being on the planet. It is not just for some elite group of people, who live in an ivory tower. And it is so important to how we understand the world and how we make choices in the world. And so there are lots of extremely esoteric ideas in science like this. And there are a surprisingly large number of people who actually are interested in it, especially when you're dealing with things in astronomy and cosmology. If you're talking about the history of the universe, if you're talking about the creation of the universe, what's going to happen in the far future, how did life come to exist? As I think we can get into a little bit later, it actually affects, in many ways, the way people think of religion and spirituality in terms of our place in the...
We're going to talk about that this episode. So
yeah,
how those two are intertwined?
Absolutely. So I guess I would say that it's really easy on the face of it to think that these things don't matter to you. To be fair, everybody, you don't have to get a PhD in something to appreciate it. There's so much you can learn by reading the popular science journalism and books and TV shows and podcasts that are out there these days. There's so many ways to get good, fun scientific information about the world. But more important than a specific topic like entanglement, which is very, very interesting to me, is the whole scientific worldview. It's how we figure out what's true in our world, how we figure out that we're not fooling ourselves. Like, what is the ground truth? Mm-hmm. In order to build all this technology that's surrounding us, these ridiculously large screens, which are all around this office, we needed to understand how to use quantum mechanics. And by some estimates, 30 to 40% of the GDP of the world is based on technologies which require quantum mechanics. You're talking about lasers, computer processors, telecommunications, and even more important than the applications is how we use the scientific process to figure out what's really true in the world, how we correct for our own biases, how we cope with the fact that we're always uncertain about things. Science in popular culture often has this image of scientists being really sure about themselves, but that's totally false.
Right.
Science is about quantification of uncertainty. It's about, asking how well do I really know this, and being honest when you don't know, and then figuring out, okay, well, what do we need to do next to figure out the things that we don't know?
When do you think there's going to be? Do you think there's ever going to be a point where there's too many questions asked, and when you get the answers to them too, just in your field alone, Andy, how do you manage the information, regardless of what's in your brain, all of the resources that we have, and you're just listening to some fundamental periodicals that you can pick up at Ralph's supermarket on the shelf or the app. How do you guys in this
Scott
field,
buys his books at Ralph's.
It's a great bookstore.
Ralph's. It's a spinny rack.
I got mayonnaise,
not
and I
what-
got the muscle fitness.
And then you can pick up a copy of my book. Not in Ralph's. Yeah. But that's overwhelming because in my community, in the military alone, that lane, we're having a really difficult time with systems, programs of records, apps, web-based services on how to manage information on and off the battlefield. I can only imagine with you in your field across the country and the world, for that matter, those studying this field, how overwhelming is it to you where you're like, Jesus, I just cannot imagine I can swallow any more information on this?
Information overload is a real problem everywhere in society. Whether you're talking about, the military, where you guys have a background, or you're talking about, even just living daily life and living in the social media world and living in a world where you have to have 9,000 accounts and passwords and
Jesus.
and it's going to get crazier if we survive as a civilization. The sci-fi future will have even more information overload, and we will all perhaps have personalized software agents whose job it is to help filter that information. But that has a whole bunch of risks as well. We're already seeing these software bubbles that people live in on social media. But in terms of how we as scientists try to deal with this, I've long ago learned that it's impossible to know everything. The best you can do is have a broad overview and then specialize in a particular few corners. I mean, maybe 600 years ago it was possible for an educated person to know almost everything, that was known, but that ship has sailed long ago. So anybody, and I think it gives me a real sense of humility, because anybody who acts like they know everything, like immediately, like,
that's a good litmus.
Put up your bullshit filter, because
that's a good litmus test to sniff out the imposters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That guy thinks he knows everything.
Yeah. And I think that there's a real problem in society of people not knowing the difference between fact and opinion and speculation.
Yeah.
And the scientific worldview, it certainly has been extremely helpful to me in being able to at least know when I'm speculating and when I'm talking about something that's, something I would like to be true, but doesn't mean that it necessarily is true.
Fact or fiction, or in terms of what we would call in our community is information versus intelligence. Like, the intelligence comes from multiple pieces of information that are vetted and verified that become fact or intelligence in our community, and what we use to take actionable steps forward. I can only imagine how frustrating that could be. But when you say words like impossible, what is possible with what you do?
So do you mean in terms of technology or in terms of understanding?
I think in terms of solving the questions at hand. Or you say, I've got 3 really big questions in my life that in the mere 80 or 90 years I'm going to be on this planet. These are the 3 questions I have to get answered for myself, or at least passed down.
Mm-hmm. It's a really good question. I think that
I could ask a question. I might have a good one.
I'm sorry, man. I get around. I get around guys like you want to run. Like, man, when I get around people so much smarter than me, I'm like, I gotta ask a bunch of questions. Pete, raise your hand if you have a question.
Are the academic articles
class?
at Ralph's next to the shitter tickets or by the eggs?
They're in aisle 8. Aisle 8. The literature in any academic subfield is so large, it's impossible for any individual human to read it and understand it at this stage. The way that we kind of gather truth is by, consensus and by the whole community being involved in the peer review process, where, other scientists are reading your work and then critiquing it. And scientists are very critical of themselves and each other, which is, I think, a very useful thing that would better serve almost any community, to not take yourself too seriously. Just because you thought of an idea doesn't mean it's a good one or it's true. It needs to be vetted, like you're talking about, in a way where you have as much objectivity and impartiality as possible. But circling around to your question about what are the things that I would like to have answered, I would like to know whether or not quantum mechanics really captures fundamental truth about the world, or whether or not there is a deeper theory under the hood that perhaps is more like what Einstein wanted to be true. I think that it would be really, really nice to know whether or not, this is sort of a side topic, but it's related, but whether or not our universe, the portion that we can access, is the only one, or whether there's more. And that's actually a legitimate topic in theoretical physics these days. And it's a real challenging one, because we don't know yet how to get direct observational evidence about other universes, which there are many different levels which you could talk about. But many of our best physical theories predict that our universe shouldn't be the only one. And that also influences our conception of our place in the larger scheme of things. And then I think, number 3 is probably, how did life come to evolve? How did we come to exist in the first place?
Super simple questions.
Super simple questions. Yes. I mean, if you want to keep going, I mean, I can talk about questions.
But that's the great thing, though, is that science has those questions, and it was explained to me in rudimentary terms when I was in college studying philosophy of religion, of all faiths, is why is science always trying to disprove what the Bible or the Quran or the Torah say? And it was best explained as like it was the Bible in and of itself, or whatever version of it you want to read, is a great guidebook how to lead life. But how do you? And I'm going to hand it over to Pete. Is because we want to tie this in, but
maybe this
Pete's
is a good.
had his hand up in the air for like 10 minutes. Hand down, Turner.
Yeah, maybe this is a good time to jump into science and religion.
Why are scientists always trying to disprove what the Bible says? And because there is an answer for how we were created, according to whichever faith you want to choose, pick.
Yeah, so this is a really, really important topic. The conflict between science and religion has become more pronounced, in the past few hundred years. It wasn't always seen as a conflict. If you were an Isaac Newton or a Leibniz, if you were working in the 1600s, 1700s, people kind of called themselves natural philosophers. People were interested in trying to understand the world and their place in it. And I think that as science has matured, it's at least clear to me that science and religion in their current forms serve different purposes and are trying to answer different questions about the world. And so I do think, though, that I feel very strongly about this. And I'm not sure what religious backgrounds you guys have, but if you're thinking about any religious text, the Bible, the Quran, the Old Testament, the Torah, I think that it is not the right path to try to take those and treat them like they're science books or history books. I think that those are books of stories that were written by people to try to understand their place in the world. At that time, they've been incredibly important in human history. They're still important today, and dramatically so in various areas. But that I think that if you want to understand how old the Earth is, if you want to understand how old the universe is, if you want to understand why is my car not working, science is the best game in town to try to figure out what's actually true in our world. But to be fair, there are definitely questions that science can't answer and shouldn't answer. So science cannot tell you how should I conduct myself in the world. And I'm not saying that any specific religion has a monopoly on the right answers to that. In fact, I don't actually think that there are right answers in the same way. When you're talking about an objective fact like how old is the Earth? And we think the Earth is about 4.5 billion years old. That's a very different kind of question from, is it okay to kill somebody in self-defense? And various religions and spiritual belief systems would have different answers to that latter question. And I don't think that those kinds of questions are ever going to be answerable in a way that will satisfy everybody for all time. And I think we have to acknowledge that. So I have a problem when people approach faith from a fundamentalist perspective where they think that I have the answer, my answer is the only possible answer, everybody else who believes differently is not even fully human. I think that we need to start with acknowledging each other's humanity and approaching all of these questions with humility, because you can be an expert on mathematical theorems, you could be an expert on solving equations in physics, but nobody has the same kind of expertise for religious questions. And so I think that it's more about having conversations.
To all the Catholics listening, no offense to your Pope.
No offense.
That question also, you could flip that path the other direction where the same thing is true. Like if the scientist is looking at the religious person saying, you believe in an imaginary man in the sky, haha, look at you, you're dumb. You could flip it around the other direction and say, you also don't have all the answers. You've got multivariate equations that you can't account for everything. You can't predict all these things. You don't know all these whys. So you're not that great of a scientist because look at you. All you have is questions.
What does the zealot say? Oh, God knows the answer to that. You're
idiot. See, it's like a two-way. It's a two-way failing proposition, right? Where they somewhere in between is that conversation where you're able to say there's something else besides right or wrong at the end of the spectrum.
Yeah, and I would never approach somebody with a belief system that's different than mine and say, you're an idiot.
Right.
I don't think that's,
And I'm not saying that you would say that.
No,
in general, we tend to.
I call Pete an idiot, though.
Well, fair enough.
You've got to see my.
That's just sophomore banter.
But I think that there's a big misunderstanding of science in culture in the sense that the fact that scientists willingly admit our ignorance in areas where we don't know everything, that's not a weakness. That's a strength. And unfortunately, in the way people kind of conduct arguments and fights with each other in debates, admitting that you don't know something is seen as a point of weakness. But I think that's totally misguided, and that it is a point of weakness to pretend that you know something when you don't really know it.
Yeah.
How would you overlay what you know about the theory of entanglement to the different religious sects? I don't even have any idea if anyone's even thought about that. Are they interconnected, or how come they're so vastly different based off time delineation, periods of our history, belief systems? Like, how do we? Is there some way? I mean, I haven't even thought about that, and I've studied a little bit about philosophy of religion, but it's just from different people's viewpoints.
Yeah. So I mean, well, pick up on the last thread. You can be an expert on what various theologians and philosophers have thought about specific topics over the years. Like, it's a factual question, St. Thomas Aquinas said this or whatnot. But I'm kind of more concerned with, is what he said true? Is it verifiable? Is it provable? Is it based on evidence, or is it based on faith or personal feeling and whatnot? My understanding of science and the truth about how the world works has definitely dramatically informed my spirituality and spiritual beliefs. I think that the way it works is that if somebody says that they have a particular idea of, this is the religion I believe in, and this is this is what happens in this religion, if the propositions in that religion contradict what we know about the world from modern science, I would be very, very skeptical that religion will take you in a good direction. But I think that religious and spiritual questions that are not concerned with factual details about the world or historical details about the world, that are more concerned with just admitting that we don't know the answers to everything. We're trying to figure out how to conduct ourselves in the world, how to, for example, how to do good in the world, if that's one of the driving themes in your religion. I think those are religious questions that can be informed by science. So there's a sense in which science, I think, can and should underlie every religious faith, in the sense that it's your reality check. And if you're asking about questions like, is there an afterlife? Or if you're asking about the nature of God, I think that knowledge of science can only helpfully inform those discussions. But you got to be willing to accept that sometimes maybe you want something to be true, and modern scientific understanding will throw some cold water on that. So, and if we can circle back to this sort of question of, let's say, if you're asking a scientist, do you believe in God or not? I think, and I understand where that's coming from for sure, but I think it's really important that we realize that this is arguably the most interesting question of all time, and it is not fair to turn it into a yes or no question.
Yeah.
Because if we talk about like the definition of God, I'm sure that if we broke it down, whatever you believe in, whatever I believe in, we would have different definitions.
Yeah.
So it's not fair to just, we're comparing apples and oranges. And if you really sat down with anybody in the world, the real question I think we should be asking is, what's your definition, or what's the definition of God that you can defend personally, like that you personally believe in. And in that sense, I think that you want to move past this sort of question of, well, my God concept is different than yours, therefore, you're an atheist, or you're not even a real human. I think that it is not possible for an individual person to have the right answer to that question.
But don't you think the public, most people, are more binary than people like you that understand that there's never going to be right, wrong, yes, no to these
people want certainty.
questions.
And people, human nature likes to see the world in black and white sometimes, but that's not how reality is. And I think that we'd be better served by developing the skills to acknowledge that.
You've developed a certain level of wisdom by being a researcher, and you accept that. Well, first off, every academic paper starts with the shit that you're not trying to explain and parameters and caveats. Like here's a lit review, here's an abstract, here's what we aren't trying to do, here's what we don't know. All these things are eliminated, and you're talking about one very specific thing. And then if we look at religious text, I mean, we found a bunch of scrolls in a cave, and that's like one of the most important findings ever. And you mentioned Thomas Aquinas earlier, one of the best philosophers of all time. What if he was a shitty writer and he's like, I can't explain, we're getting the best of what he could write in that time. What if he took his text today? Would he go, yeah, that's exactly what I wanted to say? Or we'd be like, I've had 500 years to think about this, and 80% solution. You've written a book. You probably could go back and make 500 words change in that book right now, right? So you take these texts that are imperfect and don't have the context of today in it, and we're trying to make them more than what you could make an academic article out of. I mean, a peer-reviewed article would be like, it's just the best in the time that we have right now, and there's thoughts that have advanced already.
There's a lot to unpack in that question, and in any kind of a scientific process, knowledge is always provisional. An individual paper is never the final word.
Right.
Like, you should always be willing in science to update your beliefs based on new evidence. So when I think about historical religious texts, I very strongly reject the idea that there are certain truths that 2,000 years ago we understood perfectly and that they can never change in the future. I think that the only spiritual and religious belief system that I can support is one that's willing to evolve and update itself as we learn more and more about the world. And So I don't think there was ever a golden age in the past where we had the monopoly on truth for these questions.
Do you compare religions like that? I don't know. Open to either one of you. Is there a religious belief system that says, oh, they are just stuck lockstep? I would never be part of that congregation, that church, that belief system, or this is the best when you weigh those out? Have you ever changed religions?
No, I guess, I mean, my own background is in Reform Judaism. And I haven't changed religions, but I wouldn't say that I believe everything that other people in that religion believe.
Just lay cards on the table since we're showing our dicks here. Is Episcopalian, which is like Catholicism light. All religion have the guilt, but my belief too has changed through my experiences and my knowledge to accept or not accept certain aspects of what that religion taught me. And I say that in a parochial sense because whether it's Judaism or Catholicism or being a Protestant, it's like they teach you this is how it should be. And along the course of my life, and also through science, which there's things that say, nah, not necessarily, man. You need to make your own decisions.
I'm suspect of religious belief systems that are dogmatic. I think that
word of the day. This episode brought to you by dogmatic.com.
The best kibble on the market.
Indeed. But in Reform Judaism, at least, one of the things that I've appreciated is that it's very much a question-asking faith, in the sense that it's not about you must believe this set of things or else. It's about constantly questioning and challenging. And interestingly, it's one of the faiths in the world that I think is most consistent with the scientific worldview, in the sense that I've never run into a situation where I had some religious teaching from my childhood and like I encountered some scientific truth that contradicted it and I had a crisis of faith.
You ever sit in the lab and you're banging your head against the computer screen for a question? You're like, God, help me find the answer to this. Does that ever pop in?
Well, I think that...
Is he going to provide the answers? I mean, I don't know.
Well, I personally don't believe in a God that is interventionist in that way. Mm-hmm. I think that, I understand absolutely the appeal of wanting to have a personal God that you can talk to and have a personal relationship with.
Well, it's called a faith-based system for that reason.
Funny that you say that, because I'm reading Tim McIntosh Smith's 3,000 year history of the Arabs. And obviously a lot of that is Islamic faith. And as much as, and again, this goes right back to your thing earlier, as much as I know about the literature in the international world, in the Islamic world, the Orient, all those areas, this guy can write a book and I'm back in grade school, learning. And he's like, Islam is about surrender, does not require faith. And it changes how they look at politics and everything. And I'm like, I never knew that, never understood that. So let's also going back to the religious text thing, when will someone write the final translation of what the Bible is or the Torah is? Like when you translate it from the original language to the new one. I mean, it gets
We've already answered those questions here on this episode.
It's a good question though, because if somebody is trying to claim that, let's say, the King James Bible, written in English, is the final truth in some regard or in all regards, we have to acknowledge the history of the fact that the Bible was, I think, written in Aramaic first, and translated to Hebrew and Greek, and no translation process is perfect. So even if, and I don't grant this, that you grant the first book was, handed down, by God Himself on Mount Sinai, perfect. It has been altered in many ways. So we have to be humble about, I think, how we interpret these texts. And it is just the wrong path to treat them as the literal truth. And some of the stories that we read in any of these religious texts, I think for good reasons, we would look at our modern day sense of morality and say, look, I understand the historical context, but I'm not okay doing the things that were done. I don't think those are morally right anymore. So you have to have, in my opinion, an evolving view. That these texts are not static.
If I was some holy roller Southern Baptist came in and so like the heck it didn't come down from Mount Sinai. Like, what book you been reading? Like, you get this guy rolling in and you're thinking, I'm a super educated guy. I know all of this information. You're absolutely wrong. What do you say to that guy? Or can you just say, I accept you for who you are. You're misinformed. You don't have all the information. I mean, because
I think that it's a really
you don't want to offend people like that.
No, and ultimately, here's how I wish that.
No offense to Southerners out there, because they just a really bad Southern accent.
Fair enough.
Foghorn Leghorn.
I said, Pete, I your quantum gas in order. You're sticking up the joint.
I really wish that we approach these religious issues as discussions, not as debates. So when something is a debate or an argument, it's a zero-sum game where there's one winner and one loser, and you're trying to say, my view of the world is correct, yours is wrong, and I'm going to bend you to my will, and you have to submit. But I think that is absolutely the wrong framework for these kinds of questions. For certain factual questions, if you're like, who is the director of this 1984 movie? Sure, there is an answer, and somebody might be wrong, and you can have an argument about that.
I think by
and then fact check it.
Using that subtle difference in verbiage that you just eloquently stated is debate versus discussion. I think in any field where we're talking religion and sciences, that breeds harmony with what we're trying to achieve. And I think as a modern society, a very young society, with everything that we've got going on, we shifted gears from talking about politics and things of that with Victoria Taft on the previous episode, and then going into this. But I think all of those things with what we're dealing with in this country now, that element of harmony between political parties or through systems or planets or galaxies. I mean, having a discussion vice a debate, I think setting that at the front of the stage
absolutely
really sets the tone for how you move forward.
I think that there are so many issues in society that we should be approaching from a discussion mentality and not a debate mentality.
I'm totally going to steal that.
In a discussion, the goal is to share your views, but also to learn what the other people are thinking, to really listen, to accept the fact that your worldview might change in response to new evidence and new information from other people. In a discussion, there's the potential that everybody wins. In a debate, you might think that there's a winner, but I think everybody loses. If you take a topic that is a discussion topic and turn it into a fight, everybody loses. Even the person who's viewed as the winner loses in a situation like that. So
I want to jump in because also I don't even know if debate is the right term, because really what we're describing is an argument, because a debate has an external assessor who's hopefully impartial, who says this is the answer that is the better answer of the two questions.
Well, if you're talking about like a debate contest that's judged by somebody,
right?
I understand what you mean, but I'm using debate and argument synonymously. So if you and I are having an argument and we're the only two people in the room,
argument, and you said like this whole thing with Iran and America, I've got specific knowledge about this. So if I bring in specific knowledge, do you have the capability of having your mind changed? And if it's no, then there's no point in having this conversation. Like that's more of
that's the challenge
format, right?
If somebody is not willing to change their mind based on new information and new evidence, they are stuck in the argument mentality. And I think we would all be better served, whether we're talking about religion, politics, of having it be a discussion mentality. I mean.
Evidence being based on fact, which is also important, which we don't get fed to us from our information sources.
Sadly, there are so many huge problems when it comes to how do you trust what information sources that you get your media from in the world, and just I mean, diverting to politics just for a second, I think that we have these presidential debates. That's an issue where, in politics, if somebody's saying, well, I think that we should raise taxes by this amount, and someone's saying, well, I think we should actually, not raise taxes. That's a question that doesn't have a right answer.
Yeah.
It depends on what you're optimizing for. That's the kind of question you can only have a discussion about. When things are framed in terms of debates, everybody loses.
Let me take us back to the quantum world. And I want to throw out a concept and kind of play with that. If quantum entanglement appears to be what it is, we all have some kind of connection. I mean, that connection could, I guess, ultimately be God, but it also might apply to love. Yes, we can look at chemical reactions in the brain and say that's what triggers love, but there's still, can I be more entangled with you, or can I be a power entangler? Like you think about people that gather massive groups of people, where they just are more sticky than someone who's obstinate or whatever. Can you be more entangled and be able to build a congregation more easily because you just have this quantum capability that's two orders higher than the standard entanglement?
Hey, this is Pete A. Turner from Lions Rock Productions. We create podcasts around here, and if you, your brand, or your company want to figure out how to do a podcast, just talk to me. I'll give you the advice on the right gear, the best plan, and show you how to take a podcast that makes sense for you, that's sustainable, that's scalable, and fun. Hit me up at pete@breakitdownshow.com. Let me help. I want to hear about it.
Can you be more entangled and be able to build a congregation more easily because you just have this quantum capability that's two orders higher than the standard entanglement?
Well, I think we need to step back a little. So the way that we use the word entanglement in a technical sense is very different than the way we would think about entanglement between people and individuals, or in the broader culture.
Right.
It's definitely true that if quantum mechanics is a description of the world that it's at least approximately true, then entanglement is a widespread phenomenon.
Right.
But the thing that I think is important, where we can get led astray a little bit with the analogy, is that in the experiments that we're doing, we're talking about systems that are close to maximally entangled, in the sense that they are as inseparable as you can imagine. So when I measure one thing, I learn as much as I possibly can about the other. Those systems, by definition, are very, very special and isolated from the environment, and you need that to build new quantum technologies in computation and encryption and communications and all sorts of things like that. But if you're talking about just entanglement in the world on the physical level, entanglement gets spread and diluted very quickly. So, if there's air molecules that are hitting me, they become entangled with, my shirt, but then air molecules are bouncing off a bunch of other air molecules. So that the information that air molecule had about, the temperature of my shirt or something like that, it gets diluted very, very rapidly. So there's a sense in which it is true that everything is entangled with everything else at some level. But for things that are far apart from each other in space and time, it gets dramatically diluted. There's a theorem that's called the monogamy of entanglement. So if you got two systems that are maximally entangled with each other, neither of them can be entangled at all with anything else in the quantum mechanical sense. You can have three-party entanglement or multi-party entanglement, but it gets spread really thin. So I think that, and I totally understand your question, in terms of the analogy between how you can talk about people in different parts of the world being connected with each other in important ways. And we absolutely are connected with each other, based on our shared history together and shared culture. But I would hesitate on trying to extend the quantum analogy, too far. I don't know if that's a satisfying answer, but
well, there's also, like, when you look at the big religious-based philosophers, and a lot of times in time they're not that far apart, maybe 150 years in terms of their lives. Maybe their lives even overlapped, but they have no knowledge of each other. Yet they come up with very similar concepts in wildly different cultures. Do you think, is there any kind of a quantum religion or quantum love or quantum connection that allows humans to think almost like a network and come up with these concepts that are impossible? Like, yeah, there's 500,000 people on the planet at that time, and there's going to be some random, like, we all had the same great idea.
Let's say that you had two planets that provably never had any communication with each other. And there was never a third party earlier in the history of the universe that communicated with either of these planets.
Right.
And they independently, multiple times on each planet, people on different islands, that never talked with each other,
Right.
came up with exactly the same religious text about the universe.
Yeah.
If we lived in a world like that, then I think religious texts would have a different meaning and standing. But we don't. All religious texts that have been invented are very different from each other. They're, to the extent that they have commonalities, that's usually based on a previous religion that two texts did
Sure.
communicate with and both derived from. So for example, in Greek and Norse mythology have lots of things in common, probably because there was an earlier mythology.
Right.
That the three fates or the three Norns,
Sure.
stories like that.
Before Jesus, there was Dionysus, all that kind of stuff.
So if you have a common cause, a common origin,
Right.
It's very much understandable in a causal framework how these things came to be. But I would say to you that the kind of truth that science is about discovering in the world is the kind of truth that these two civilizations on these independent planets that never met really could independently. Their science textbooks in the areas where they research the same topic would overlap to a large extent. One civilization might be ahead of the other. There might be some things that were understood by one and not the other, and vice versa. But where they overlapped, you would get this convergence because you're dealing with objective truth in the world in a different way. And I think that we really need to consider that's not, in my opinion, what religion should be about. When you're talking about how should I conduct myself in the world, let's say, what am I optimizing for? Am I optimizing for human happiness? Am I optimizing for lack of suffering? Am I optimizing for material wealth, which is the religion that we have in modern society in many areas? I mean, there isn't an objective answer to what should I be optimizing for. I don't know who said this, but there was a philosopher who said, you can't derive an ought from an is. From the way the world is, you cannot then say, therefore, the world should be this way. So I think that we need to acknowledge with humility that the kinds of questions we're dealing with in religion and spirituality are the kinds of questions that merit discussions, and they're not the kinds of questions that anyone has absolute authority to the answer on. Everybody undergoes their own spiritual, personal struggle, and as a society, we try to evolve, a moral consensus about certain issues. So for example, most people in the modern world think that it's not okay to just murder somebody just because. That wasn't always true in human civilization. I think that's moral progress. That's my own personal, belief, but that comes, from discussion over time.
When you look at, let's just take Reform Judaism, is that if it's truly Reform Judaism, you can almost call it freestyle Judaism, where you're allowed to reform and educate and learn and evolve, or does reform lock in and then there has to be a new Reform Judaism that's called something else?
I understand your question. Yeah. I mean, if at any given time, in Judaism today, there's, Orthodox Judaism, there's conservative, there's Reconstructionist, there's Reform.
Right.
And any particular movement is not a monolithic thing.
Right.
People believe different things within that movement. Sometimes things split off. So the Methodist Church is now splitting off into two denominations. I think that that is inevitable for any religion that wants to survive and thrive. You have to be able to evolve. You have to be able to change. You have to be able to update your beliefs based on new evidence. And so for example, the split in the Methodist Church is based on whether or not you accept gay people or not. I'm of the opinion that you shouldn't discriminate against anybody because of sexual preference. And but I understand that there are lots of people who feel differently. And I think religious freedom is important, but especially in areas like this, separation of church and state is really important, because if you have a state-sponsored religion, for example, it's based on this false idea that there is a right answer to these questions, and it's really a mechanism of power and control, as opposed to wanting to understand the human condition and our place in the universe. And that's where I think positive religious and spiritual growth can happen, when we're constantly having discussions about how can we conduct ourselves in the world.
What about the pace of science and technology and advancement? Like you guys are going and as you go through the scientific growth process, oftentimes you get into a smaller and smaller silo, or your sphere becomes smaller because there's just, like, so you can't know it all, right? But it does seem like religion, you have time to reflect and go back. And I mean, how many, theologians read a lot of the old books over and over and over again, and they get more knowledge out of that. I mean, people still read Sun Tzu, for crying out loud, 1,000 years later or more. And then in our world, if you can't talk intelligently about Clausewitz, it means you haven't read it 50 times. So science, and not that you guys don't spend time in older things, but there is that forward thing. Is science missing some of that reflection where you can really pull something more out of the data? Like, you guys are still working your data from the cosmic bell test, I'm sure, but at some point you do move on, or no?
There are a few things that we can do with that data that we haven't done yet. But yeah, at some point, you move on to the next project, which can definitely be a natural extension of that project.
Where, like, if you go to like a Methodist church, they got the same main text and they continue to go through it. And then they do like side projects with the Book of Job and all these, over and over and over again.
I think that, again, this is, circling back to a point we've covered a little bit, but that I think it's really important that we should look at religious texts as something that can and should evolve, and our interpretations of them can and should evolve as we learn more and more about the world. It's incredibly important to have humility on all these issues. To say that my religious text was perfect, many years ago in the past, and I'm just revisiting it, and that's the path towards stagnation in a religion. I think if a religion wants to stay modern and vibrant, it has to evolve.
I like your cold water theory, is that whether we're talking about information or religion or science, is that even the answers that we provide, or the faith or the comfort that we get out of something, can change in the future. And it could be from the next brilliant 33-year-old genius out of MIT saying, hey, that theory you thought was so great? Check this out. There's new technology that says this, or we just found this hidden scroll in a cave and it now tells us this. And if you're not willing to accept that, and everything is finite, just like the answer, yes or no, which is finite, or winner or loser, finite, I think that you really shed a lot of light on that. Just explaining that cold water theory is like, hey, you always got to be looking out for that, because someone's going to throw it in your face eventually if you just hit the end of the road. So really brilliant.
Thank you. And I don't know, like, if you guys would agree with this, with your background in the military, at a certain level, let's say you have some idea about, the way things are on the ground, you might be wrong, and
it's
cold water.
That's an absolute recipe for disaster.
Cold water might be thrown in a disastrous way, and I guess the thing is that if you approach the situation where you're so incredibly sure of what you're going to find, I think that can be very dangerous. It's important, in all aspects of life, but especially in literal life and death situations, to acknowledge the uncertainty.
We've been pounding you for an hour about religion, but this should be a discussion. What questions do you have for us?
I love the idea of asking people, what is your definition of God? What do you actually believe? And it's not the kind of thing that you have to go out on a limb and share all your beliefs if you don't want to. But, what do you believe now, and has it evolved over your lifetime?
I know for me, it has evolved. I was raised in a Presbyterian church with some Baptist thrown in there. My dad has, when he was alive, he had a degree, master's in divinity. So I had a lot of exposure to a lot of different churches and a whole lot of church. And I'm thankful for that. I mean, it was great. It's great to be able to talk intelligently and without passion about it, because I've seen a lot of different varieties. But when I think about God, I think about science and looking for planets. When we first were trying to figure out, like, maybe the sun gets a little darker when it goes by. You can't look directly at it, can't really see it, but you can tell it's there. So that's sort of how I look. Like, you can tell me there's no God, but explain Silent Night, explain the Duomo, explain all these incredible things that were inspired by God. If it's inspired by God, then there is a God. I just can't put my finger on who, what, or how it is, but I accept that if I think that there isn't a God, I don't have the data to prove that. It's like I don't have the data to prove that there is. So I'm sort of not hedging, but I accept that there's so many things that I don't know anything about. Yeah, there's of course, there's some kind of higher being that has a better knowledge or capacity. We certainly aren't by the way we act day to day, we are not the apex creature or existence out there, can't be.
Absolutely not. I guess what I would challenge you to do moving forward,
is this a homework assignment?
It is.
I thought,
It is.
are we getting some stipend as research subjects,
Yes.
like from the university?
I need
Am I gonna get
a Starbucks coffee card.
Are we going to get a coupon?
And this is this is not like a afternoon homework assignment. This is a lifetime assignment, which is to try to fully articulate to the extent that you can, what is your definition of God? And because I understand that nobody has fully thought that question through.
Yeah.
And people can give answers of varying precision, but that the whole process and the whole individual struggle is I think more of the point than arriving at a specific answer that is going to be correct. So I mean, I throw the same question over to you.
Well, my upbringing and background, I think that has changed and evolved based off of life experiences and people. And Pete, I believe you just asked me this question on an episode, or someone did, was asking me about my faith. And I told them how it had changed from, again, the very parochial, up, down, kneel, bend, here's the book, ring the bells, genuflecting, all that. And not really taking that on board as what religion is. Not that there's this omnipotent being that's going to answer all the questions, that is interventionist. I've really pulled away from that just because of what I've seen the church evolve into as more of a organized religion for money, where these large organizations are, cat herding, thousands of people into the congregations and milking them for funds. And then you see some of the not ethical things, or what I call ways how not to live your life, of what the church and these institutions are doing. So I've lost faith in that. I will say that, but that's institutional. It doesn't mean I don't have faith in other things. But what I've told people for the most part, and I've gone on record as saying this, is my religion, if I had to say I have a religion now, is in people, my faith is in people, that ultimately, if you are good at heart and you believe in other people, that you have a strong network. And when you want to talk about entanglement or connectivity, and I don't know if those two words are synonymous in your world, but those are the things that really make us evolve as well as human beings through generations, or eras, or even our own lifetimes, as minuscule as that in the drop of sand of this planet in 4.5 billion years. So I think that is what on a daily basis, if I'm thinking about a God, I'm thinking about something has brought us together. And my faith lies in those people that share that type of message of just basic human kindness and doing more for other people that they can't do for themselves. I think that's really the tenet that I guess if I had a Bible, it would probably be only a pamphlet. I don't need scrolls and thick textbooks to tell me that, because that's what I feel. And I think that you should feel that in your daily life is like, I feel this way. And if people struggle with that, I feel this way, or religion tells me this and science tells me this, but I really want to believe this.
Mm-hmm.
So where do you put your faith? What is your real faith if you're being force-fed certain information, but you act a different way? But mine to answer your question would be, I think that's the broadest definition I could give of my God, if there had to be one.
I would want to add an Annex A to mine too, is because of my experience. This is important. It's in the way I've evolved. It didn't really occur to me right away, but I'm okay with your God. Whether it's a philosophical God, a spiritual God. Obviously, I'm not okay with the God that does harmful things to people on purpose. As a norm. But whatever. I've met a lot of wonderful Baptists, Islamists. Of all stripes. And ultimately, people are good people, and what the faith is sort of like the kind of T-shirt they wear. And if I get mad because someone's got a different T-shirt on, then who's the asshole, Well,
what's interesting, what Andy said too, is your religion has evolved during one point in our civilization. It was all right to kill another human being. We thought that was all right. And if you're thinking about the larger scheme or this supreme being that creates everything, and we're all equal as animals, murder and killing others that are inferior, that's the animal kingdom. We are part of that animal kingdom, but we've put almost like we've held ourselves to a higher standard as we've evolved and had these cultural norms and societal norms placed on us. So does that make a religion better or worse? I don't know.
Thank you guys for sharing. No, I certainly appreciate it. There's so much to unpack in what both of you guys said.
I think what he likes best is we can go from Looney Tunes cartoon characters from sophomore arc to.
Well, I was just thinking when Looney Tunes, I was thinking about rabbits and have rabbits evolved religiously and do they have a conscience and are they better rabbits than they were 300 years ago? I don't know.
It is a lot. Yeah, it is a lot to unpack, but it's really good stuff, man. I'm grateful for your time.
It's always fun, talking about this stuff, and and I think that this is an example of a true discussion, where it's like, even if I may believe different things than either or both of you, we have points in common. And I think that the fundamental thing is to, we're starting from a point of acknowledging each other's humanity. Everybody's here on this world struggling, trying to figure out what the hell is going on.
That's right.
Like, what should I be doing with my life? How should I treat other people? And I did want to, jump back to focusing on, connections with other people.
Mm-hmm.
So and I can share a little bit about my own personal spiritual beliefs. So the thing that I think science can help us most about is not telling us what God is, but telling us what God probably is not. And in my own personal beliefs, I'm not saying that I have the answer or I'm an authority on this, but I don't think that God is a person. So I cannot subscribe to a belief system where God is an individual being. If you're talking about the standard, Judeo-Christian definition of, an omnipotent, all-knowing, all-powerful, eternal God who's most likely a dude who created the universe and is responsible for providing meaning. I don't believe in that, but I do believe in. So I don't believe in a personal God that you can have a personal relationship with. And I understand though why so many people want that to be true. And I would never call somebody stupid or for wanting that. It's part of our nature to want connection with others, to want to create meaning in the world. But I think that it's really important to me that this meaning is not provided to us by something external to us. We are responsible for creating the meaning in our lives. It doesn't mean that life is meaningless if it's not handed to you. In fact, it's much more meaningful when you earn it. So I think a spiritual struggle is something that everybody has to undertake in their lifetime, and some people struggle more, some people struggle less. But I think that's the most valuable thing that you can do. and to realize that you got to approach it with humility, and you got to understand that personal relationships are real in the sense of other people. We don't need to look any further than the people around us to think about making a personal connection. And so I feel similarly, to what you were saying in terms of having faith in people, having faith in the fundamental goodness of people. Now, obviously, people in certain circumstances can do awful and terrible things. So I'm interested in how do we get to a world where the better angels of our nature, so to speak, are expressed more often. And I really do think that if we lived in a society that was structured around discussion instead of argument for issues that are not objective, we would do much, much better as a civilization.
I think we made a misstep when we developed monotheism. And I'm not saying that polytheism is an answer, but like an omni God, it causes too much strife and struggle. We're on an Euler diagram, and you know what an Euler diagram is. For the audience, they don't picture a Venn diagram, but with even more stuff on the thing. So there's a whole bunch of circles and squares and different shapes. So if you have let's just say, a multi-theistic approach to life, it doesn't mean that I have to worship your God, or their God or whatever. But I can't accept that Odin was a god, Titan was a god, Ahura Mazda was a god, or is a god, I guess I should say more accurately. And then it's like, yeah, there's room for your God, there's room for my God, and if you don't choose our team, we're all in the same rec softball league. We're all going to go drink beer afterwards, and yeah, to think that I have the only God, well, again, who's the asshole?
This also brings things around to the question of, like, when somebody tries to frame the as a debate, like, are you an atheist or are you a believer? Really, when it comes down to it, everybody believes in something.
Yeah.
It's just a question of articulating it and being honest about your assumptions and being honest about what you want to be true. So it's totally unfair in modern society to, the word atheist has negative connotations, to label somebody an atheist because their definition of God is different than yours. Because if we're really honest, everybody's definition is a little bit different, or a lot different, in certain cases. Yeah. And so I don't believe in a God who is a person. I think that's the wrong category. But I don't think that I'm an atheist just because there are other people who do believe in a personal God. So it's a really complicated question. Do you believe in God? And I think that we got to get away from the simplistic yes or no question. It's not in that category.
If you really look at etymology and what atheism is, doesn't mean that there isn't a God. You can argue about the definition of atheism. We can't decide what the definition of culture is, or any number of words.
Yes.
So just to say it's just, again.
Dude, before we walked into this, Pete goes, get ready to have your mind blessed by Andy Friedman. I'm like, right now I'm thinking, like, where do prayers go if there's not? Fuck. Like, think about that. Like, it's like, like all these people I'm not saying that prayer is bad, but even if you're an atheist, like, you can't hope for anything. Like, hope is what we call prayer. So you can't hope for shit anymore. Like,
we franchised it.
Mind officially blown, right there.
Happy to help. And let's say you're talking about the subject of prayer.
Yeah.
I think that it has always served like a very useful need for people. And I totally understand the desire to want to have a larger, higher power that's out there that's answering your prayers. Maybe it's as simple as, like, I'm in pain and I want it to stop, or please help me out with something, or you're being more altruistic and saying, my friend is in trouble, please help them. And those are totally normal and natural thoughts. And I understand that it's very challenging if you're somebody who believes that you're having a conversation with a being who might potentially answer you and help you. Then it's a very, very different worldview to think that, well, if that's not true, then prayer is a form, in my view, of internal self-reflection and clarifying what you'd like to be true about the world. Doesn't necessarily mean that it is true. Sometimes your prayers get answered, but I don't think it's because of the prayers, unless you say, I want this to be true, and then it starts a process by which you take actions in the world that help make it more likely to become true.
Wow.
How much of religion is human instinct? Because you look at instincts in animals. Butterflies they have no brain at all. They just have a system that flaps wings, but there they go, milkweed all the way up Northern California for the monarch. Like, there's no way they could know these things. They know when they're north, and they change their bodies to be more woolly so they can survive in the colder climate. Pods of whales, the way penguins behave. There's so many things, and we're part of, like as Scott said, we're part of the animal kingdom. Is religion a byproduct of an instinct to cluster, to focus our emotional energy? And we don't know that we're doing it. We just do it.
Yeah, I think that the answer is probably yes. And I'm not an expert on this particular topic, but a lot of people have talked about evolution and the biological evolution and the kinds of religious sensibilities that it predisposed us towards versus and there's also the cultural evolution aspect of religion as well. But I do think that as mammals, who all of us had a mother and a father at the beginning, whether we grew up with them or not, it's very, very natural to model our God after parental figures.
Yeah.
And I think that's an evolutionary byproduct. And we're very social creatures. We talk to each other. That's how we make our way in the world. And it's very, very natural to extend those kinds of social instincts to the wider universe, whether or not there is a conscious being at the other end. It's very, very natural to see in the weather, in the trees, in the natural world, visions of ourself. But I worry about us trying to create a God in our own image. And I worry that we have causality reversed. So, another thing that I think is really important is this idea of personal responsibility, in the sense that there is no right answer, in my opinion, for what is the meaning of life. What should I do in the world? And I think that it's a mistake to try to outsource that answer to something external to yourself, or something that you were taught when you were a child. I think you have to struggle with it personally, and but there is meaning in the world, but it's meaning that we create through discussion and through struggle and through suffering and through all the things that we have to endure. And that's, the world it's not just as simple, as like, oh, either you believe in this faith or the world is meaningless. I think that's ridiculous. We create meaning in the world. And in a certain sense, Carl Sagan was a scientist and a science communicator who said this really eloquently. He said, we are the eyes and ears of the cosmos. We are the means by which, a universe can come to understand itself, even if there isn't a personal God that created it, that's outside the universe. And I mean, ultimately, one way of kind of talking about my spiritual beliefs is that I don't believe in anything that's supernatural. And by that, I mean, that is magic, that breaks the laws of physics, whatever they may be. I think that everything that takes place within the context of the natural world. So I cannot believe in a supernatural being that exists separate from and independent of the world. The only kind of God I could believe in is something that is directly part of the world. And I don't believe God is a person, but I believe personhood exists all around us. Mm-hmm. So if you were talking about a very simplified idea, I would say that the kind of God I can believe in is the collective meaning that is brought into being by the efforts of conscious beings all throughout the universe, whether they're us, whether they're aliens, whether they're the evolutionary descendants of chimpanzees in a million years.
Aliens. Yes. Wrap your head around that one. I'm going to be listening to this one again on replay. Listen to Andy, and I'm going to do it sober, and then let's do it drunk again.
Yeah, that sounds reasonable.
Do you ever do quantum entanglement over beers or like booze, hard liquor? I mean, is that bad? That's probably bad. Huh? Writing drunk is bad.
It is extremely common in physics to mix the two together.
I'm going to make a voodoo Andy doll, and not put pins in it because that's not what kind of guy I am, but I'm going to put it in front of a computer monitor and I'm going to make a little throne out of marshmallows.
That sounds like a lot more humane version of
give you something to snack
voodoo.
on and like your little spiritual Andy thing. And that way, if someone does make a bad Andy doll, then you'll have a counterbalance.
That's true. So the pins from somebody else using the voodoo in the wrong way,
I'll take those and make
they'd
s'mores.
get stuck in the marshmallows.
Exactly. Yes.
I saw the latex doll you have made of John.
Yeah.
In your house. John, if you're listening, man, that ain't cool.
The mouth, though, it's so nice. Hey, man, thanks for coming on the show.
So
and
Absolutely.
we need to do more of it.